It's a strange place to start a sermon on care, but I want to invite you back with me to this past Friday morning when I sat nearly upside down in a dentist chair in Midtown. Now, even the mention of the dentist can be triggering for some of us, so I will spare you the details. Suffice it to say, I had to be there. I did not want to be there. What happened there was not pleasant. And yet, it was surprisingly meaningful. Because by Friday morning, I was knee-deep in today's sermon on care. I was thinking about how we build our spiritual muscles, attend to our spiritual fitness. And so I sat in that chair, and the dentist and his assistant worked in my mouth diligently, carefully, and with a deeply gentle strength. And the assistant reassured me throughout the procedure. At one point, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "You're doing great, kiddo. Almost done." Usually I bristle when someone says something like that to me, and I just looked at him and nodded and reflected, surprising myself, reflected on what it meant for them to care for me in this way. Now, I don't know if they caught me looking up deeply into their eyes. I don't know if they knew that I was wondering about their motivation to care for this stranger who showed up on their doorstep in need. I don't know if they were curious as to why I was so relatively calm. The reason was this: I felt profoundly cared for by both of them. Now, sure, there is always a financial transaction when it comes to dental work, but money alone is not a recipe for true, compassionate care. And that is what I experienced on Friday. So what is the recipe then? I am learning that it starts with a dose of self-compassion, that we add in a foundational belief in the worthiness of every human being, a sprinkling of understanding that we share with others the drive to be free of suffering, and then we top it off with the motivation to relieve the suffering of others through our own action. When we are willing to hold all, like the man in today's reading, to do for each other what he does for the boy in his arms, to carry each other, loved ones, friends, strangers, even the most difficult people, as the world's most sensitive cargo, to hoist others on our metaphorical shoulders when we are able, and to allow ourselves to be carried when we need to be. When we can do that, if we can do that, then perhaps the sun might shine a little brighter and the road might not feel so wide. This way of seeing the world, this way of being in the world is not easy. And so here's the good news: we do not have to do it alone. We are supported in such an ethic of care by our community, by our faith, by spirit, and by those who have gone before us. And so we look to people like the Reverend Waite Still and Martha Sharp, and we soak in the lessons of their lives, of their action, of their bravery and their resilience and their willingness to sacrifice so that others might live. We take inspiration from the work of Charles Joy and Hans Deutsch, and we ponder the meaning of the chalice flame each time we light it, a symbol of love, a symbol of sacrifice, a beacon of hope and freedom. Let's take it further, though, and reflect on the very real people who were saved by that beacon. Because our faith is not just symbolic. It's not only theoretical, it is real. And it is true. And our tradition is filled with the stories of people who were driven to action by the belief that all people have inherent worth and dignity. And our tradition is filled with the stories of people who were literally saved by that belief. These stories, these people, they exist in our midst here at UUCA. You know this because you are these people. It has been my honor and privilege this year to learn a few of your stories by my work with the lay ministry team. We saw their photos and their names last week during our lay ministry commissioning. These incredible people volunteer their time to help tend the pastoral needs of this congregation. My work here at UUCA is to help deepen the lay ministers' pastoral care training and to teach them skills and resources to expand and harness an engaged, sustained compassion as they care for others. They are eager to learn, though they already know so much. They are ready to expand the size of their hearts threefold and more, though their hearts are already quite large. I have been asked to teach them about compassion, and yet it is I who am learning constantly about compassion from them. During the January 2nd lay ministry service, like many of you, I listened to Ellen Beatty, who is here this morning, and Jennifer Thilo offer the wisdom born of their respective experiences in refugee camps and nursing homes, and tears ran down my face. And as they spoke, I thought of the generations of Unitarian Universalists who, just like Ellen and Jennifer, put their faith into action, their values into practice, who understood the needs of the world and the drive of their hearts, who heeded the call of justice and for some the call of the divine, and set out to offer our bruised and broken world what good they could. I knew as I listened that morning that in just a few weeks I would be offering this final sermon in our sermon series on spiritual fitness, and that we would explore the theme of care in the history of our tradition. I also knew that care is a humongous topic at any time, but especially right now as the pandemic persists. It is so huge a topic, in fact, that when we met as a worship team to discuss today's service, and the suggestions and the connections and the possibilities just kept flowing one after another from our staff members and our lay worship leaders, we all had to stop at one point and take a collective deep breath. And Reverend Taryn wisely suggested that we had enough material on the table, not just for my 20-minute sermon this morning, but for an entire sermon series on care. So stay tuned. I decided that we could explore today the lives of just two of our spiritual ancestors, whose theologies and understandings of the value of human life translated into transformative care for others. And that we could reflect upon how each one of us is supported by and invited into that legacy. So this morning, I want to share with you the stories of Clara Barton, Civil War nurse and founder of the American Red Cross, and the Reverend Joseph Jordan, educator and the first African-American man to be ordained a Universalist minister. As we hear their stories, I invite us to reflect on three commonalities that they share. First, these are wounded healers. Each of them struggled mightily, physically, emotionally, financially, in relationships and in life. Lest we canonize them as saints, let us remember that they were human. Second, each of them extrapolated the actions they took from the ethics that directly followed the theological and anthropological tenets of their faith, In other words, what their religion taught about the nature of the divine and the nature of human beings logically and systematically led to the kind of care they provided others. And third, neither of them set out to be revolutionary. And yet, through their radical beliefs, ethics, and subsequent praxis in the world, they revolutionized their fields, their communities, our faith, and ultimately, the world. Clara Barton, we know well. You might know that she was raised in a Universalist family with a strong belief that all people would be reconciled with God. You might know of her work during the Civil War, where she tended the wounds of Union and Confederate soldiers alike, earning the moniker Angel of the Battlefield. You might know of her connections to the International Red Cross in Europe during the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s and her founding of the American Red Cross. What you may not know is that Barton was a shy and sensitive child in a household that was plagued by mental illness. That she was raised mostly by her older sisters, and that she struggled herself throughout her lifetime with physical and mental illness. That she had periods of time when she was unable to get out of bed, and other times when she would not sleep for days while she was tending to the needs of wounded soldiers. She thrived in the cacophony of a war camp. She struggled in love. She fought to be taken seriously in her various professional pursuits, and she demanded equal pay for equal work before that was even a thing. You might not know that at the Red Cross, Barton was challenged as an administrator, that she kept horrible records, financial and otherwise. And while she is not usually associated with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, her work on the war front and her understanding of the value of her own work and of the work of others who were discounted by society led her to join those women and others in the fight for women's suffrage and in the struggle for abolition. Clara Barton's universalist faith that she was and all people were, in her words, born free and saved the pain of reaching spiritual freedom through years of struggle and doubt, translated not into a life divorced from good works, but to a career centered upon offering care to all people, no matter who they were or what they believed. Her nursing was one example of this. This value lived out in her life. Her abolitionist work, her suffragist work, those were other examples. Now, each of us finds our own way to connect our deeply held beliefs to the world's most profound needs. And the Reverend Joseph Jordan responded to the needs of his community in a different way than Barton. Ordained a Baptist preacher in 1880, Jordan was introduced to Universalism through Thomas Whitmore's The Plain Guide to Universalism, 1840, which, according to UU historian Willard C. Frank, explained the goodness of the universe, the loving parental guidance of the Almighty for all humanity, and the promise of salvation for all. Jordan was touched deeply by this message, radical in many circles, not the least of which was his own post-slavery African-American community in Norfolk, Virginia. Many folks in this community held strongly to the belief that former slave owners would be and should be punished eternally in hell. Jordan, however, studied with prominent Universalists and began preaching universal salvation. He opened a church and soon after a school for the children of former slaves. Frank writes, in Jordan's estimation, church and education went hand in hand to help people live life with dignity, purpose, effectiveness, and to empower them and their community. Like Barton, Jordan too struggled in life and in love. He lost one wife and a son to divorce and another to disease and death. Finances were consistently challenging, and Jordan was caught between two worlds. Universalism was, as I said, controversial in the African American community and was debated at length in the Black press. And while the National Universalist Church helped support his school, the National Association was majority white and deeply segregationist. And yet Jordan was determined to educate the children under his care because he believed in their inherent worth and dignity and therefore in their right to receive an education. He oversaw both the church and the school until his death in 1901. And after he died, the funds from both organizations helped to found a growing Universalist mission in Suffolk, Virginia, where there was also a day school for African American children. The beliefs that all God's people were God's children, that all would be saved in the hereafter, translated for Jordan into making accessible one of the most effective tools for changing the course of lives and for empowering and equipping a community and its citizens, an education. Joseph Jordan and Clara Barton, through their lives, their work, and yes, their own suffering and their care for others, offer us a call that reverberates throughout our living tradition. Who will we be? How will we be, and what will we offer a world whose needs are never ending? If we hold the inherent worth and dignity of every person as a foundational tenet of our faith, then the resulting ethic is one of care. One that compels us to carry our fellow human beings like sleeping children, to immerse ourselves in the hum of their dreams, fill our ears up with their breathing. We are called to care for others in this way, regardless of their political beliefs, regardless of their theological beliefs, regardless of where they live or how much money they make, be it a lot or a little. We are called to care for others as if they are precious to us because we believe they are precious. Now, before I conclude, I want to say a word about accountability and justice. Living out an ethic of care does not mean that we do not hold our fellow human beings accountable. It does not mean we allow for abuse or any kind of violence. It does not mean we excuse dangerous or antisocial behavior or the refusal to adhere to basic public health standards. It does mean that, like Clara Barton, we do not vilify others and we do not deny them care. We don't deny them either basic compassion or life-saving medical care. It does mean that we recognize the fiery fury of righteous indignation when it rises in us, of anger when it boils in our gut, of moral superiority when it rears its ugly head, and we take a breath and we remember that the person standing in front of us or sitting at home behind a computer keyboard typing vitriol is a person just like us. They are a person who desires to be free of suffering, who longs to be cared for, a person who could have a label, handle with care. What would it look like if each encounter with someone who challenges our faith in humanity was viewed as an invitation, an opportunity to build those spiritual muscles, to practice compassion, to practice embodying grace and shelter, goodness, and a different lens through which to see the other, a lens polished with understanding and love, care and compassion, worth and dignity. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is not easy, It's not easy in normal times, and it is certainly not easy in these volatile days when so many of us are struggling mightily and our nation is rife with division. But if in the muck and the mire of a Civil War battlefront, Clara Barton could live out her faith by indiscriminately tending the wounds of Confederate soldiers, then at the very least, we can try. If Joseph Jordan could live out his faith, even in the face of unspeakable trauma of slavery and the pain of Reconstruction, and if he could channel his desire for change into the education of children that everyone else discounted and forgot, then we can do this. If Martha and Wade Still Sharp and Charles Joy could live out their faith by risking their own lives to save the lives of countless others, then we can rise to the challenges of our day. And we can do so in part because we do not encounter the ethical dilemmas or the moral quandaries or the frankly terrifying realities of this time alone. Across the generations, we are lifted and we are held on the shoulders of those who have gone before us. Their light can be our beacon. They will guide us across the road. And they will, as a cloud of witnesses behind us, celebrate the ways we live out our faith in this bruised and battered and broken world of ours. As lovers and dreamers, holding all in love, lighting a flame of hope and offering the compassion of our hearts, wounded as they are.